617-478-108. También puede llamar al 206-471-4482 o a su teléfono en cabina 206-402-4241 y en Facebook como Amigos de Seattle Radio. Amigos de Seattle Radio. Amigos de Seattle Radio.
Muy buenos días con todos. Estamos aquí un día más con nuestro programa La Voz de la Justicia y estamos muy bien acompañados y voy a estar contando quién tenemos aquí el día de hoy. Una persona muy importante, muy humana, que trabaja para la ciudad de Seattle. Pero quería primero agradecer a nuestros radioescuchas, darles las gracias por estar aquí esta mañana en La Voz de la Justicia. Es un programa de justicia ambiental, de justicia social, que he organizado por el Duwamish River Community Coalition, que es la coalición de la comunidad para la limpieza del río Duwamish y también para los programas que existen medioambientales en nuestro barrio de Georgetown, de South Park. Así es que les damos las gracias. Si quieren más información sobre nuestros programas, estamos aquí cada miércoles y a las 10 de la mañana tenemos varios invitados. Tenemos también varios temas del río, sobre la contaminación del aire, pero hoy vamos a estar hablando sobre las inundaciones y el cambio climático. Así es que les damos la bienvenida a todos y welcome everyone for being here with us. One more week that we are hosting our Voz de la Justicia program in Amigos de Seattle Radio. Always thankful to Amigos de Seattle for having us here every Wednesday, and to you all thank you for listening. We have a very important guest today, an important person from the city of Seattle, is the Seattle Public Utilities Manager, Andrew Lee, who will be introducing himself in a little bit. But also I will welcome you to ask questions. We have some topic today prepared that is going to be addressing flooding, climate, and understanding better Seattle Public Utilities. But if you have any additional questions, please do let us know. We are here. So thank you for being here with us this morning, Andrew. And it's a pleasure to have you here. If you can introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about you.
Thank you, Paulina. And just huge thank you to Amigos de Seattle and to the Duwamish River Community Coalition for inviting me here today. I am the general manager for Seattle Public Utilities. I've been in that role for about 7 months. And I am passionate. I thought I would share a little bit of a story of how I got into this profession. I graduated as a civil engineering student in university. And one of my earlier jobs was working for the San Francisco Public Utilities Commission. And the second day that I was on the job, I had an experience where, I started the job a day after some of the worst flooding in San Francisco in 100 years. And it was so bad that there were cars floating down the street because there was so much water. And that wasn't just water, stormwater, it was also sewage, actually, in the streets. And the day after I started, and my boss presented me in front of what was kind of the equivalent of their council, and said, we have an engineer who's going to work on this problem for the city and county in San Francisco, and that was me. And so for the next approximately year, I had a chance to meet with community, talk about the flooding that they had experienced, understand the challenges that the city and county of San Francisco was facing with flooding and their infrastructure, and then eventually translate that into a capital program to address flooding in the different neighborhoods of San Francisco, and see projects start to get built. And at the end of that year, I looked at that experience and I said, this is exactly what I want to be doing for the rest of my life. I loved that ability to translate community needs and community goals and interests into actual action. And that blend of my engineering background plus working with community and public policy was exactly what I wanted to do. So that's why I love my job right now, because I get to work with community. I get to see us take desires that the community has, values that the community has, and translate that into projects, into programs and efforts to make meaningful change in our city and in our environment.
Qué bonito, Andrew. Te agradecemos mucho, Andrew, por decir sobre qué es lo que trae compasión en el trabajo, como tener profesión de un ingeniero civil que tuvo la experiencia y la pasión de empezar a buscar cómo traer a la comunidad esos conceptos y ayudar para que no existan las injusticias de mirar que la infraestructura tal vez no se ha puesto lista para poder ayudar a estas comunidades que están sufriendo como de cambios climáticos o como de infraestructura que no existe para las inundaciones. So what is your job exactly? And we cover a little bit of what are you passionate about, but tell us what is to be like the manager of Seattle Public Utilities?
Yeah. First off, I get to work with some amazing, passionate people. And so we provide drainage and wastewater, solid waste services, which is garbage, recycling, compost, and drinking water services. And so I oversee a team that manages the different infrastructure systems, the different utility systems. And so much of my work, obviously, is working through other people. So I oversee the work that they do. And they do amazing work. Again, and I can describe a little bit about what Seattle Public Utilities does. We have a regional water system. So actually, we provide water not just to the 750,000 people in Seattle, but we actually provide it to 1.5 million people in the entire King County region. And so that is an amazing, amazing water system that provides a much-needed resource for everyone in this county. Then also, we try to work to prevent flooding and pollution and sewer backups. And so we can collect wastewater, we collect stormwater, and we try to convey that out to either water bodies or to the wastewater treatment plant. And so we have a number of folks that maintain and collect the system, and they are valued employees on the front lines every single day. And then we also oversee garbage collection. And so that's a huge part of our services to make sure that we're collecting the garbage on a routine basis, and we work through contractors to do that. But obviously our goal is not just to continually collect garbage, but ultimately to reduce the amount of garbage that people are producing. And so again, those are just some of the services that we provide.
Sí, entonces es tan importante de entender toda la complejidad, que es complejo el departamento porque está mirando todo lo que tiene que ver con los desperdicios sólidos, con la basura, con el sistema de utilidad y pues no solamente que Seattle Public Utilities o el departamento de utilidades de aquí de la ciudad está también proveyendo, por ejemplo, 1.5 de agua que viene de una parte regional del sistema del agua. Entonces es tan importante que entendamos que no solamente están haciendo como los desperdicios, que estén en trabajo sobre la basura, pero también cómo prevenir los impactos de las inundaciones y coleccionar lo que tiene que ver con todos los desperdicios del agua y los de los pluviales, ¿no? Entonces, thank you, Andrew. It's a complex work. It's a lot of pieces coming together when we're talking about SPU. But you also do part of the Superfund, and can you explain the role, for example, of when you were talking about source control and how is that important for the river?
Yeah. As the stormwater utility and also as the wastewater utility, in times in the past, those utilities have produced quite a bit of pollution in the water bodies. And that pollution has come from businesses that are upstream, from the roadway as well, and sometimes even from homes and just properties. And over time, that pollution goes through our systems, goes through our network of pipes, and leads to contamination of the sediment, so pollution in the ground and right next to our rivers and our creeks and our lakes. And so we are responsible for assisting with the cleanup of those polluted areas. And so that includes sometimes putting a cap on those areas to make sure that people aren't exposed to those pollutants. Sometimes that involves digging up the pollutants and removing them and then putting some sort of protective layer on top. It also involves upstream work, meaning preventing those pollutants now from ever entering the system and recontaminating the water bodies. And so we engage in all aspects of that. So we try to prevent new pollutants from entering into and polluting the sediments, and we also try to clean up the sediments, and that's our role in the Superfund.
Es importante también recalcar que el rol que tiene este departamento, porque pues al tener varias industrias alrededor que se pueden contaminar, que están contaminando el sedimento básicamente, entonces es el trabajo de este departamento evitar que se siga contaminando, pero ya cuando ha ocurrido, por eso es que es una parte responsable, por ejemplo, de la contaminación del río de Wamish y pues el departamento de SPU es una de las partes responsables por eso, porque tienen que controlar los sistemas de contaminación. Let's talk a little bit more now about flooding, and since we have touched upon it, could you please explain the role that King County play versus SPU when dealing with flooding? And sometimes it gets confusing for some neighbors to understand what is King County doing versus SPU, and because also in our neighborhood, for who we are and geographically, it would be great to understand who's the role generally and responsibilities on the flooding.
Yeah. And we do have a very, very intricate and sometimes confusing utility system. So I completely understand the fact that it is confusing sometimes. We operate two different types of utilities in the city of Seattle. So we have our wastewater system, and then we have our stormwater system. And the stormwater system obviously collects the rainwater. The wastewater, for the most part, collects the wastewater from people's homes, so the sewage. But some parts of our wastewater systems also collect the stormwater. The stormwater systems that are completely separate from our wastewater system are managed entirely by the city of Seattle. So we are the ones responsible. And so for portions of South Park, like in the industrial areas, where we are building new stormwater drains, those are the city of Seattle's responsibilities. And so when it floods on the street, for example, generally speaking, that is Seattle's responsibility, not King County. The wastewater, on the other hand, system is a shared system. And so we collect, so the smaller pipes that are wastewater, collecting sewage from homes, those are Seattle's pipes. But they connect eventually downstream to King County's pipes. And so King County operates the larger pipes that eventually take the sewage to the treatment plants. And our treatment plant happens to be located in Discovery Park in the Magnolia neighborhood of Seattle. And so in those systems, it's a shared responsibility. And because our systems are so intertwined or linked, when there is a sewage backup issue or a flooding issue that's linked to the wastewater system, it's a shared responsibility sometimes to fix it. Now, sometimes it could be primarily the city's responsibility. Other times it can be primarily the county's responsibility. But we need to work together cooperatively to make sure that we're addressing the sewer backup issue or the flooding issue together.
Thank you, Andrew. That's complex to understand, but un poquito de lo que habla es que, por ejemplo, es la contaminación y la inundación de las aguas pluviales, eso tiene que ver muchísimo con lo que es la ciudad de Seattle. Por ejemplo, cuando hay inundación en la calle, es definitivamente la ciudad que es responsable. Pero cuando son las aguas de los desechos, por ejemplo, que no es de lluvia, sino los de los desechos, eso tiene que ver una división con la ciudad y el condado de County, no solamente porque las tuberías son de la ciudad, pero la responsabilidad tiene que ver también con los desechos que se emiten en toda la ciudad y por supuesto que el condado tiene que prevalecer con la supervisión de eso también. Entonces ahí es que se forma un poco de confusión, pero los esquemas de quién es responsable de qué es lo que nosotros queremos como barrio para que se sepa quién es responsable cuando ocurren estas inundaciones. So, of course, Andrew, that you know that flooding and sewer overflows are a serious problem in the Duwamish Valley. How does SPU specifically track flooding, the flooding, and how does the flood damage on private property? And then what is the specific role of SPU playing to prevent flooding and sewer overflows in the Duwamish Valley?
Yeah. Tracking flooding, we have two kind of different ways that we do that. One is obviously through complaints. When people experience flooding, then we always encourage them to call us. And our number for that is 206-386-1800. And I'll repeat that a couple of times during our talk today. But we encourage people to talk. It creates awareness for the issue. Sometimes flooding is oftentimes due to the system, meaning the utility system, but other times it can actually be due to issues with people's on-site plumbing, right, or their on-site drainage. And so we try to make sure we're helping customers to differentiate between the two of those, because if they can solve it with something on their property, then we want to help them with that. Other times when it is caused by something in our broader utility system, then obviously we're responsible for making sure we're doing something about it. The other way we actually work to kind of track flooding or identify the issues in our system is through modeling. And so we use computer models to replicate storm events in our system and to identify where we might have areas of the system that are not as good at handling the amount of stormwater that's coming. And you can imagine the importance of this because especially with climate change, the amount of rainfall that we're getting is different from the amount of rainfall we got in the past, right? And so rainfall is constantly changing, and because of climate change, in fact, we're seeing more frequency of intense storms, and so really, really large storms. And so we use computer models to try to predict where, with the changes in the weather and the climate, which areas of our city are going to show up with more problems. And so we use, again, complaints coupled with kind of hydraulic modeling or computer modeling to be able to identify where we have issues coming up. Now, on what do we do with all that data? We typically, again, try to work with homeowners to solve the problem. Obviously, if there is a quicker fix or quicker way to address the issue, then we strive for that. Where the issue is extremely large or we need to do a bigger fix in our system, then we have capital programs to do that. And so capital programs may involve things like sometimes we do green infrastructure projects, and those are things like constructing swales, what we call natural drainage systems, and those are places where the stormwater, we put it into rain gardens, and it can soak into the ground where the ground has the ability to accept that stormwater. In other cases, we need to upsize pipes, and so we need to build bigger pipes to convey the stormwater. Sometimes we construct storage facilities, and so it's like a big tank underneath the ground, and so we do that as well. And so there are different types of solutions that oftentimes take years to build, and sometimes I think our average is somewhere between 5 to 7 years to build those types of projects, and so we work to do that as well.
Thank you, Andrew. Entonces, lo que aprendemos es que, bueno, primero cuando tenemos, por ejemplo, una inundación, lo más importante es llamar al departamento de Seattle Public Utilities, que el teléfono es 206-386-1800 y reportar, porque pues así ellos construyen un poco más de los casos que están ocurriendo. Y el teléfono, creo que Luis nos va a ayudar a poner, es 206-386-1800. Bueno, también hay otra cosa con el drenaje que ayuda muchísimo y es que lo que tienen que ver y observar a través de algunos modelos que se ponen para ver los aguas pluviales. Como sabemos, ha estado lloviendo muchísimo más y la intensidad de los cambios climáticos trayendo muchísima más agua, más lluvia, pues eso ocasiona que también haya más inundaciones. Y lo que pues ellos proponen es mirar toda la data y la información, los datos que se vienen de estos modelos electrónicos y poner varios escenarios y para así poder tal vez traer mucho más recursos para la comunidad para que pueda resolverse a través de tal vez jardines pluviales o como se llaman en inglés, rain gardens, ¿no? O infraestructura verde en general, que sería tan importante. Andrew, is there a connection between flooding in the Duwamish Valley and source control, or are they two different things? Because we're talking about, for these two different things, it would be important to make the difference.
Yeah, they are two separate things. They both have to deal with the stormwater system, but in source control, we're trying to typically work with property owners to prevent pollutants from entering into the storm drain system in the first place. And so those programs are working with businesses, for example, to prevent certain types of metals or other types of harmful pollutants from getting into the stormwater system. On the flooding side, typically it has to do with the size of the pipe or the size of the storm event that's occurring. And so in those areas, they're very, very different problems in a sense, and we try to tackle them in different ways.
Entonces sí son cosas diferentes y lo importante es saber que pues cuando estamos haciendo, por ejemplo, hablando de las contaminaciones en las industrias, es muy importante que también nosotros sepamos que cómo se lidera es contrayendo más bien toda la contaminación de estos lugares, porque la infraestructura que existe a veces no puede contener todo. Entonces, la importancia viene de cómo nosotros podemos controlar esas fuentes de contaminación, pero a la vez también cómo controlar cuando existen muchísima lluvia y trae eso a las inundaciones. Ok. Un momentito, a ver. Ok. ¿Del número para llamar? Sí. Pues aquí tenemos el número para llamar sobre la inundación, que sería el 206-386-1800. Y pues eso es lo que nos está ayudando a que nos diga cuando usted está sufriendo de inundaciones, lo importante que es reportar, porque así ellos ven mucho más de los casos y así pueden dar más atención. Muchísimas gracias, Luis, por ayudarnos a poner el teléfono de lo que es importante. Now let's move a little bit and talk about the communities impacted, Andrew. And how do you work with impacted communities, especially that are being impacted by flooding, and knowing that if we talk about the Duwamish Valley, these are environmental justice communities dealing with many other layers of injustices. So how to make sure that health equity is a priority, and how do you prioritize environmental justice communities will be great to learn as you are now prioritizing in your work as in your new role.
Start off by describing our overall planning framework and our prioritization framework. In the drainage and wastewater business, or the utility, we recently did something, are in the process of doing a project called Shape Our Water. And it's a 50-year plan for how we're going to prioritize drainage and wastewater improvements in our system. And one of the things that we tried to make sure was that equity and environmental justice were a core part of that plan from the very beginning. And so as an example of that, historically, a lot of our previous plans were, they prioritized which flooding places to focus on based primarily on complaints. And so complaints was the number one way that we prioritized. What we know, though, is that in communities, especially that have historically not necessarily had good experiences with government, that they might not complain a lot, right? They might not call the government to let them know, hey, we're having a problem. And so we intentionally said we need to shift away from that. We need to focus more on, for example, computer modeling, and then confirming that there are issues by proactively going out to community and saying, are you experiencing these problems? And we've found areas of the city that we did not know about, for example, and where we are now focusing more prioritization efforts on saying we need to deal with those flooding issues in these communities that were not reaching out to us in the past. And so that Shape Our Water framework is intentionally trying to change the way that we prioritize and do our business to make sure that we're not missing communities that have historically been underrepresented. The second thing that I would say we're doing is intentionally around the Duwamish Valley area. We've been working together with the Office of Planning Community Development, also with the Office of Sustainability and Environment, to work on this concept of creating a Duwamish Valley Resilience District. And the concept there is to empower community with the authority and the ability to have money, first off, and to target where they want to invest that money in the community. And so that is another thing that we're working on. The last thing I want to describe, though, is just actually following through on investments that we've known are needed for many, many years. And so because of the fact that we know that South Park has been very much hit by climate change in particular, but is also subject to sea level rise, and we know that there's inadequate piping systems, for example, stormwater systems in the area, we're making a concerted effort to say we're going to follow through on investments. And I'm happy to say that within the last, especially 5 years, we've been able to do a lot of improvements in this area. And so that includes, right now we have multiple streets in the South Park industrial area where we're completing construction of new stormwater pipelines. We increased the size of one of our wastewater pipelines on 14th and Concord area. We're also completing our South Park pump station. That's actually pretty close to complete, which will have a significant impact on street flooding in the South Park area. We're also working on a water quality facility to eventually improve water quality that's going out from the storm outfalls in the South Park neighborhood, and eventually partnering with King County as well. So there's a lot of different capital efforts that we're trying to make sure we elevate the importance of and make sure we follow through and complete them.
Hay muchísimas planes, lo que se refiere a la comunidad de Duwamish Valley, que es una comunidad que se ha descrito como de injusticias ambientales. Entonces, alguna de las cosas que están haciendo este departamento es, por ejemplo, a través de la iniciativa que se llama Vamos a darle una forma a nuestra agua, o Shape Our Water, que lo que está queriendo hacer es cómo incentivamos a que la comunidad realmente llegue a la ciudad y use su voz para hacer los cambios, porque por el gobierno muchas veces la gente o no llama o no utiliza los medios de comunicación como para decir esto está sucediendo en nuestro barrio. Entonces, ¿cómo dar prioridad a esas comunidades que la voz no ha sido tan fuerte por estos años, ¿no? Entonces, también se ha estado trabajando con otros departamentos como el Duwamish Valley Program, que significa que es parte también de nuestro barrio, pero de la ciudad, y con OPCD, que es también otro de los departamentos que trabaja en un distrito resiliente, y eso se llama el Resilience District, que lo que quiere decir es que cómo empoderar a la comunidad a que tengan ellos la voz y el financiamiento para hacer cambios en el barrio, y así poder dar como una mejor acogida y resistir un poco más a los cambios, pero también dar esa voz y ponerla en la infraestructura que se necesite, y así poder también mitigar, porque hay muchísimos, South Park especialmente tiene tantos injusticias de lo que puede ser ahora en el futuro del levantamiento global, por ejemplo. Se va a levantar mucho lo que es el río, lo que se llama el sea level rise, que entonces va a aumentarse la cantidad de agua y puede inundarse un poco más en South Park. Entonces, eso es cómo estamos atendiendo. Y hay una estación ahora que se llama el Pump Station, que es ahí en South Park y que va a poder evitar que se dé más inundaciones. Y también hay otro departamento que se llama el Water Treatment Facility, que es una facilidad para tratar el agua que está contaminada. Andrew, it would be great to understand exactly what the difference that will make the pump station, and also what is the role specific of the water treatment facility. And when do we think that pump station, because it has taken some time and we're super grateful to be able to see it completed every day. I pass by, I bike to the office and I see it having so much of the progress. So it'd be great to understand how this pump station going to be solving these problems. And then also the water treatment facility, explain the difference between these two.
Yeah. The pump station was actually originally slated to be completed in May of this year, so this month. But then unfortunately with the concrete strike that was happening in the city, we had delays on that. However, they're back. They were pouring concrete earlier this month and probably even more recently than that. So I'm excited that project is back on track to get completed. The pump station is important because of sea level rise. And so when the stormwater system flows by gravity, typically, and so as long as the Duwamish River, the elevation of the water is low, then the stormwater on the streets can flow directly out to the Duwamish without any problem. However, because of low pressures or because of certain extreme weather events, the sea level, and also climate change, when the sea level rises, as it did in January of this past year, then unfortunately the stormwater cannot get out. And so what happens is it just stays there on the street. And so what the pump station is going to be doing is when you have those really high tide events, like we had again earlier this year, the pump station will turn on. And the pump station will take the water that's in the roadway and pump it out into the Duwamish. And so that's the benefit of the pump station. It will clear out the flooding in the streets. And so we're very excited about that. That's a long, long time coming.
Do we think it's going to be ready?
By the end of the year. Yeah, but hopefully before the next wet weather season. So this winter. The water quality facility is slightly different, and the water quality facility is not about preventing flooding, but it's actually about preventing pollution into the Duwamish. And so the concept is actually whether the pump station is turned on or the pump station is turned off. Whenever there is rain falling, then that rainwater will go through this water quality facility, and it won't be treating the entire area that drains into the Duwamish, but just the area around South Park. And so that stormwater flow will go into this water quality facility. Our intention is to construct it as a natural drainage system. So plants that will actually, through the soil, be filtering out the pollutants, and then it will go out into the water body. And so we're very excited about that because I think we see, obviously, preventing flooding is a huge responsibility, but also making sure that the water is clean in the Duwamish is really important as well. And so those two projects will work together to address flooding and also improve water quality.
Thank you. I really thank you for saying that, of how important it is to make sure that water is clean. Entonces, de las cosas que aprendimos es que esta estación que se llama el Pump Station aquí en South Park va a ayudar. Lo que es por ejemplo, cuando existe muchísima agua, muchísima lluvia, es cuando esta estación va a poder, va a estar haciendo el pompeado para que puedan entonces no entrar al río para que siga inundando las calles. Entonces, esa es la función principal de esta estación, y esta ya se va a abrir a final de año, y justo sería antes de que exista el otro, porque en enero es cuando el río sube muchísimo y encima llueve, entonces es cuando se provoca estas inundaciones. Entonces, al tener esta infraestructura ya vamos a poder controlar esas inundaciones. En cambio, lo que es la facilidad del tratamiento de agua, eso es otra cosa diferente, claro que está relacionada, pero esta lo que quiere hacer es que limpia la contaminación. Entonces, mientras una está bombeándole, que se llama el pump station o la estación del bombeo, y la otra está limpiando el agua, porque ya no queremos contaminar más nuestro río de Duwamish o nuestras calles con agua contaminada, ¿verdad? Entonces, esta es solo la diferencia. So, pump station is coming hopefully at the end of the year. The water quality facility in Georgetown.
Actually, in South Park.
In South Park, I'm sorry. And then there's another one in Georgetown that is King County.
That's right. Yeah, King County's. So the stormwater, we have two different systems. Again, we have a stormwater system, and then we have a wastewater system. Although the wastewater system also accepts a certain amount of stormwater, so it gets more confusing all the time. But the facility that we'll be constructing in South Park is going to be a stormwater facility only. So it's only treating stormwater before it goes out to the Duwamish. The county is in the process of constructing also a what's called a wastewater mixed with stormwater facility, or combined wastewater or combined sewage treatment facility in Georgetown. And that project will operate less frequently than the water quality facility that we'll be constructing in South Park. I believe it will operate somewhere around 20 to 25 times a year, whereas the stormwater facility in South Park will be operating, as often as it rains. So it could be up to 140 times a year, 180 times even. And the Georgetown facility will be treating combined sewage before it gets released out into the environment.
Entonces, eso también es muy importante de entender las dos diferencias, porque hay la facilidad, es esta que va a existir en South Park, también que es el South Park Water Facility, Water Quality Facility. Esta va a ser más que está tratando también sobre más importante, el agua de lluvia. Entonces, eso es lo que va a estar haciendo, limpiar eso antes de que vaya al río Duwamish. Mientras que la que existe en Georgetown, esa es más todo lo combinado, los desechos y también el agua de lluvia. Y esa va a operar a menos funcionalidad que esta otra de South Park, que hasta puede operar 180 veces al año, depende de cuánto llueva y cómo poder hacer la limpieza de eso. So hopefully, when all these are operating, we will feel much better as far as how we're controlling flooding and how are we putting a better infrastructure for our communities. And talking about our communities, is there a plan for mitigation for families who have been impacted by sewer backups, flooding, and specifically talking, by, again, a need environmental justice community?
Specifically within South Park, what I can say is obviously we've been working and trying to work with community for a number of years. And members of the community are aware that we obviously tried to work to install backflow preventers. And so backflow preventers are devices that are on homes to prevent sewage from backing up into their homes from the sewer main inside the street. What I think, I heard from the community was that those backflow preventers were not as effective as people had hoped. And in many cases, those backflow preventers were leaking, and people had to install other types of devices to prevent the backups. Or in some cases, there were other issues with them. And so part of the discussion that we've initiated more recently is this idea of looking at another solution, which is grinder pumps. And so grinder pumps would be pump stations, small pump stations inside people's homes that would, instead of using a backflow preventer, would pump the sewage out into the sewer main in the street. And so that is something that we're hoping to discuss more with property owners. The advantage of that is that it's something that we could install quicker, and because it's a small home level pump station as opposed to a large project in the streets. And so that's something, again, that may provide some relief to homeowners to prevent sewer backups in the next upcoming winter season. In addition to that, we're looking at a larger project together with King County. And so at the end of the day, we don't want sewage to have any likelihood of backing up into people's homes. And so that is why we're working together with the county. And I mentioned that relationship between the city and county. This is one of those areas where the county's system does impact the city's system and therefore impacts people's homes in terms of sewer backups. And so we're working with them right now on analyzing potential, defining the problem, but also looking at potential ways that we can fix the problem. That will be a multi-year project or effort. And so it will be, very likely 5 to 7 years before we see that effort come to fruition, meaning before we see a project that's in place. What I can say, though, is the partnership with the county is strong. I talk almost every week with folks at the county, and they're very committed to working together with us on solving this issue. The other aspect of that is because of the fact that it will take time, though, is why we want to make sure that we're implementing that shorter term solution, i.e. the grinder pumps, sooner rather than later, and so to provide some more immediate relief to our customers.
I really appreciate you acknowledging that there are families that are being impacted big time, and coming up with solutions at local level. And before, we have never even been talking about these grinder pumps. I had to look it into Spanish to make sure that I am translating it well. But it's so important that we know that these families will have some relief, as we see it happening every year, and we appreciate. So did you say that this will be a role that SPU will be playing with the families locally to help them install and help them feel more protected for the upcoming?
Yeah, I think we're going to still try to work through how we actually get the pumps installed. And obviously it's going to be based on, whether a family wants us to come in or not. We're not going to be forcing our way on anyone. But if families are interested, there are different ways we can do that. And so I think we're going to try to work with community to identify what's the best way that we can do that, whether families hiring a contractor, us working together with them in a different way. There are just multiple ways that we can work. And so we're going to try to figure out the best way with community.
Would these be costs to the families, or this will be?
Utility will pay for them.
That's great. That's great to know. So let me make sure I say that also in español. So, algo de las cosas importantes que estamos haciendo, dice, es poder apoyar a las comunidades que han estado ya sufriendo por las inundaciones y cómo prevenir, por ejemplo, todo lo que se tiene que ver con la inundación en las casas y cuando se pone y se rellena y ya todo se cierran los sistemas del agua. Entonces se están hablando de unas bombas trituradoras que podría el departamento SPU ayudar a las familias a instalar, pero obviamente tendría que ver con contrataciones y todo eso, pero es una manera de poder apoyar a que ya no existan inundaciones en el barrio de South Park, que existe la mayoría en Canyon, en Chicago. Esas son las calles que han estado sufriendo varias de nuestras familias sobre las inundaciones, y a veces tienen varias contaminación de ahí en sus baños, que se sube el agua a través de los inodoros. ¿Cómo evitar eso en una comunidad que ya sufre de tantas otras cosas? Y pues ahora me da alegría de saber que se está pensando en estas bombas trituradoras que cubriría el costo este departamento para poder ayudar a las familias. Andrew, that's so important. And maybe I have a couple of last questions here. Are there any resources available to the community before, during, and after the flood events, and how to respond to flooding? I think you mentioned it's very important to use your voice, and we have the phone number going in there. But is there any other things that we can think of before? I mean, now summer's coming, but then immediately after we will have to be dealing with this.
Absolutely. I'll reinforce. Call us if there are issues, 206-386-1800. It's really important to maintain that connection. There are things, if folks are experiencing issues with flooding, say from the street, getting into their properties, then we, at the South Park Community Center, typically before big storm events, we do put out sandbags. And so those are available to folks to get them. Our folks will help load them onto your car, and then obviously place them on your properties as necessary. I would say continuing to work with us is probably the most important thing. Obviously, I've mentioned this idea of putting grinder pumps into homes, and so giving us feedback on how that is going, on ways that we can do our job better. I think our goal is to make sure that we're coming along as a resource alongside community, and also obviously helping to fix issues with utility systems. And so we want to make sure we're doing our job as best we can. And so feedback to us is really, really critical, where we're doing our job well, where we're not doing our jobs well. And so those voices are incredibly important. But those are the things that I would say. And obviously the obvious things like pay attention to the weather, right? And talk with your neighbors. I think some neighbors are going to be more aware of what's happening than others. And I think having that community dialogue is really, really important, so that we can make sure that we're able to get messages out to everyone in the neighborhood.
Muy importante las recomendaciones que nos da Andrew. Uno de ellos es obviamente llamar y hacer escuchar su voz, porque mientras más llamemos es como que ponemos más en alerta lo que está sucediendo. O sea, no quedarse calladito cuando estamos impactados por las inundaciones. También hay un programa que trae estas bolsas de arena para prevenir la inundación cuando ya sabemos que va a venir las lluvias incontrolables, entonces poder hacer eso. Continuar trabajando con el departamento SPU y darles todo lo que se pueda de comentarios, ¿no? Trabajar con ellos. Es muy importante eso también, de que si algo no está funcionando, que usemos nuestra voz para decir, no, esto no me funciona para mi familia, yo sugiero que hagamos esto. Entonces, eso es lo que se quiere saber, que la voz de nosotros es muy importante como comunidad impactada. Y también ayudar y estar trabajando con los vecinos, ¿no? Si tal vez lo que funciona para Luis, lo que funciona para mí, es lo que funciona para alguien más. Entonces, tener esa comunicación con los vecinos, con los neighbors, y ver cómo se podría hacer como una manera colectiva trabajar mejor, ¿no? Andrew, just to wrap it up, maybe you did mention the Resilience District, and if there will be a way to describe for community to understand these big plans that they've been discussed with OPCD, the OSC, and of course SPU. How would be the best way to describe as we're thinking and as a way of mitigation for flooding? How would the resilient district, how would you describe it to a friend that we can start engaging our neighbors?
Yeah. What I would say about the resilience district is it is a way to put power and to put money into the hands of community to make community decisions. And it's also a way to give the community more flexibility in how they use it. So I'll speak specifically to utilities. When we do a project, we have to make sure that project has a strong utility nexus, and that means that it needs to be benefiting the utility primarily. And so there are limitations on what we can do with that money, right, that we're spending on behalf of the community. But so often, when we're investing in these things, the community may want to say, well, while we are doing a flood control project or while we're doing a sewer improvement project, we also want to invest in these other things, right? We also want to maybe invest in community parks or community businesses or other things that are housing potentially. And all of those things are absolutely important, but unfortunately there are limitations in what the utility can do, right? We can't build a affordable housing project alongside, at the same time necessarily as our infrastructure project. And so the resilience district, in my opinion, gives the ability with funding for community to say, this is how we want those investments to play out in a way that's more flexible for community. And so it also enables, the term resilience. Resilience has to do with not just utility infrastructure. It has to do with community resilience. Making sure that people aren't as our neighborhoods get more expensive, that people don't feel like they're forced to move out of the neighborhoods, right? It also has to do with resilience of businesses, right? Making sure we're still valuing community businesses. Has resilience, we talked about sea level rise. There's so many different aspects to resilience. And so the resilience district is intended to give the community the flexibility to deal with all of them together as opposed to kind of discretely, individually.
Ya, lo que le pregunté es que describa un poquito más sobre lo que es este distrito resiliente que se ha estado hablando tanto en la ciudad y cómo beneficiaría a nuestro Duwamish Valley o South Park en Georgetown. Y lo que se quiere decir es que cómo dar el poder y cómo dar, por ejemplo, los recursos de la infraestructura para que nosotros como comunidad designemos lo que es importante para nosotros. Que si, por ejemplo, vamos a tener un poco más de recursos y dinero, nosotros definimos cómo eso se vería mejor en nuestro barrio. Si es que es más viviendas asequibles o si es que es más para infraestructura, pero seríamos nosotros como comunidad quien define. Eso es lo que es, en conclusión, el distrito resiliente que se llama o Resilience District. Y así poder nosotros definir como darnos el poder de la infraestructura, pero necesitamos esos recursos como para nosotros poder definirlos. Esto es lo que funciona para las inundaciones, esto es mejor para nuestra contaminación. Nosotros queremos más viviendas asequibles para que nuestras comunidades se queden aquí, o tal vez esto es para la contaminación del aire, para evitar tal vez más infraestructura verde, árboles, pero sería nosotros la decisión de eso para poder hacerlo. Andrew, it's been a pleasure to be here with you this morning. I hope you join us back. There's so much to talk about and so much to learn, and how we can continue working together and making sure health equity is prioritized and making sure that our community understands how to use our voice to define the present and the future as we're talking on flooding, as we're talking about river cleanup. So I really want to thank you for taking the time to come to our space, and I hope that we can continue this conversation in the future. But we also want to wish you the best and your nomination to be the permanent manager. And I know it's a lot of responsibility. I know it's coming with especially being representative of a department with so many different issues. And we wish you the best, that you would use your living experience and your heart and your soul to move forward with the best decisions. So thank you for being here.
Thank you so much, Paulina.
Muchísimas gracias a Luis y amigos de Seattle. Esperamos verles el próximo miércoles en La Voz de la Justicia. Estaremos acá y traeremos información sobre la escuela marítima. Tenemos también información que viene sobre el parque del Duwamish Waterway Park y tenemos el Departamento de Ecología para hablar sobre el futuro de lo que está ocurriendo con nuestro parque. Así que tenemos varios planes y esperamos que puedan unirse. Manden sus preguntas. Pueden escribir a www.drcc.org o a Paulina a drcc.org también en español. Hablamos varias personas en staff español si quieren hacer preguntas para el futuro o si quisieran ver aquí temas. Más importante, que les damos gracias a ustedes por estar escuchando y nos vemos el próximo miércoles a las 10 a.m. en La Voz de la Justicia. Soy su amiga Paulina López y nos vemos el próximo miércoles.
3, 2, 1.
Descarga nuestra app en Google Play y el App Store. Búscala como Amigos de Seattle Radio.